So welcome everyone to this History Indoors talk, a topic which is called Research is Personal. My name is Michael Saul. I am a researcher at the University of Essex, and my research looks at how the Civil War has been seen, portrayed throughout the centuries, from the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, and how the Civil War played a role in Colchester's history, for example, and the importance of the conflict in Colchester. Now, this talk is nothing to do with that whatsoever, and actually looks at something that I did as a undergraduate at Winchester. Now, my BA dissertation at Winchester was about Bomber Command and its perception from 45 to 2015. But looking back, that research was certainly influenced by my family, by my grandfather in particular, and by my surroundings and the environment I was in. And that really tells us that us as historians, no matter who we are, a TV historian, or if we're a historian who just writes books, or wherever we do, we're always influenced by our past, by our family's past perhaps, or by things that have gone on in our lives. Something that always influenced us to do what we do. If you ever come to any of our roundtables, you always know that I always ask a question: what got you into this topic? Because every topic we do, we've always been influenced to do it by something in our lives. Now, my example here today is the most obvious, okay? It's a family member, it's my grandfather and his life story. That's the reason why I'm talking about bomber commands for so long. But for our historians, it might be small things, it might be other things in our lives, but we're always influenced by things that have gone before us. And so, as a member of the audience, always, when you listen to a historian speak or read a book, always think about, what influenced them to do this? What influenced them to write this? What influenced their argument? Because arguments are often constructed by our own personal experiences. And so therefore you can't really take the eye out of history. It's always going to be there. And today's talk is looking really at the pros of that, yes, but also the problems of that. And especially if you don't recognize that, what are the problems? What comes out of this? So my talk really is focusing around my grandfather and my life. My grandfather is on the picture. He's on the bottom right. He's kneeling down, bottom right, with his crew, probably taken in Palestine as he was out there in post-45. And this is him here, Terence Robert Thomas Saul. Now, he was born in the 1920s in a very tough childhood. Came from a broken home, a divorced parents in the 20s, which is quite a unique circumstance really for someone in the 20s. And he struggled as a child. One thing we know about him certainly is that he was sent around different parts of the family to be looked after at times, and he had a very troubled childhood in a lot of regards. But he spent most of his time on the Isle of Sheppey, where most of my family come from. And we know that he certainly loved his aircraft because he was part of the ATC, and he joined the Air Force Bomber Command in 1943. And he left Bomber Command in 1948. So 5 years he spent in the command. Now, you may ask want to ask me what regiments, what squadrons he served in. We've only just found out those squadron numbers very, very recently, and I haven't done enough research into the squadron numbers. I've just started that myself. But it does appear that he served really a lot of his time in Air Transport Command. Parachute drops, for example, supply drops from 44 to 48. In 48, especially in 45 to 48, especially in Israel-Palestine area, doing things like search and rescue and the like in that regard. So we can see that's a picture that he took in an aircraft. Now, I assume these pictures are most likely from training, and he trained especially, we know, 43 and 44 was when he was training in the Air Force, and he most likely started actually his career in the Bomber Command as a ground crew, and he worked his way up through. Now, the reason why he became a flight engineer in Bomber Command is because of his previous experience as a mechanic. He was apprentice mechanic, and clearly they saw his skills and put him in that direction. We know that he obviously learned to fly. There's stories passing down my family of him flying Tiger Moth, for example. I know my dad's here right now, so he can definitely chuckle at that story him and a tiger moth. But he served as a flight engineer when he was given his wings, and he served in mainly Halifax. He served in a variety of aircraft, but his main aircraft was the Halifax, and an aircraft that he certainly loved. If you ever talked to him, he would have definitely said that Halifax was much better than the Lancaster, which I know that for you here, maybe you love the Lancaster, I do apologise for. But for his opinion, the Halifax was a safer aircraft, was a better aircraft. You could bail out the Halifax much easier than you could the Lancaster. So he definitely preferred it. And he served in Halifax in his time in Palestine as well in 46, 47, 48. So he certainly had an affinity with the aircraft. And certainly if you ask crewmen throughout that time, they will always prefer the aircraft they served in. And that is bound to be the case. So my grandfather served in his time. I don't know much about his time in the Second World War specifically. He never spoke much about his time in the Second World War. Most stories you have is from his time in Palestine. That's where most of his stories came from. But growing up, I was always really intrigued by this, listening to his stories, listening to my dad telling the stories as well, always intrigued by this. And so I was really excited and really kind of engrossed in the story, for example. But he left the Air Force in 48. And the reason why he left the Air Force wasn't because he didn't like the Air Force. It's because of the officers that were coming in. He didn't particularly like the officers that were coming into his regiment in 48, coming straight from officer training. There's a story that the officer told him to fix bayonets and charge across an airfield. And he was like, I'm not doing that. And he kind of realized it's pretty time for him to pack it in. So he left the Air Force in 48. He married my grandmother, Ira Saul, soon after, and had my dad in 1960. Now he worked really in the print for most of his life, and I knew him very well. I knew him. He was really a kind of inspiration to me growing up, not just only history, but also other things as well in terms of sport and football, in terms of conversation. I'll often be talking to him most days. Real big influence of my life. But one thing I'd certainly felt is that he certainly felt angry and annoyed, betrayed perhaps by how Bomb Command was treated after the Second World War. He certainly couldn't understand why the command was treated in such a way it was, and he felt hurt by it all. And I went to university at Winchester in 2012, and I really wanted to look into this. Look into Bomber Command, look into why this was the case. So I've already been influenced by this. Even before I went to Winchester University, I was influenced. I wanted to do my research on Bomber Command. I wanted to figure out what was the case. Why did Bomber Command get treated such a way? Why were the crews treated in such a way? Why do they feel such a sense of betrayal? I was intrigued by this, and especially it all came to a head, I think, when I went to the museum in York with a Halifax there. And those Halifax, that is in two parts, they merged together pretty much, and he went in it, and knowing and seeing his face after coming out and the memories from that day really stayed with me, and I wanted to kind of figure this out more. So I did my BA dissertation at Winchester 2012 2015. However, what happened in 2013 was my grandfather passed away very suddenly. I remember that spot when I heard the news. It's something that won't stay with me for a long time, I can imagine. And his death certainly led to much more intense interest in this period, led to me wanting to kind of figure this out, to take it apart, to kind of figure out what was going on. You remember this was the same time where we find the memorial being put up in Hyde Park, for example, the Bomber Command Centre being, the plans for that were being submitted at this point in time as well. All these kind of things going on, and my grandfather died in the midst of this. Never got to see it to fruition, which always made me quite sad. And by the time 2015, I knew that I had to do this research. And so my research was the changing attitudes to Bomber Command from World War II to 2015. I was set in stone. This was what I was going to do. I was so deterred to do this. I wanted to do this so much that the university actually had no lecturers who could actually supervise me, because no one did Bomber Command and the kind of memory aspect of it. So no one could actually supervise me. And But fortunately, one of the historians at the university just took great interest in this and supervised my work. He was actually an 8th century historian, but he supervised my work on bomber command in the 1940s. So I'm very grateful to him for allowing me to do it, and I really did enjoy it. I went to Lincolnshire. I went through Pathe newsreels, films, games, comic books. I was looking at all these different things about how bomber command was seen, how it was viewed throughout this time period. I wanted to understand what my grandfather went through. I wanted to try to understand his feelings. I'm trying to understand why he was treated in the way he felt he was treated. And so this is what came out of it. And here are my chapters that I did. And now I won't go through, don't worry, this is not a go through of my dissertation completely. I'm not going to bore you with all the boring details. But this is the kind of chapters I went through. And some of them make a lot of sense, okay? So chapter 2, chapter 3, kind of bogs down for a dissertation of this, isn't it, really? Reaction of Bomber Command 45 to 80s. Certainly could have cut that down into small chunks, certainly. And the one-day perceptions of the bomber crews, again, no, it makes sense, doesn't it? But the two chapters I'm being out of this, which really highlight probably the issues, yeah, that I didn't realize myself, of when the personal in the research, is in chapter 4 and chapter 1. Because chapter 1 doesn't really link to, if you think about it, doesn't really link to the whole dissertation. I'm looking at from World War II to 2015. And yet here I am looking at perceptions and experience during the Second World War. Now, if you think about a 10,000 word dissertation, it's not a good idea to do this, is it really? But I did it. You might be asking, why did I do that? I think it's because I wanted to tell my grandfather's story. I wanted his voice in there. And I knew a lot of the stories he had from the war and from his time period. I want to put them into my work. I wanted to give him a voice, give him a voice in my work, to allow him to speak through it, for example. It didn't link at all to what I was doing, but I was led this way. And rather than my being led by the sources, being led by the material, I was led by my own desires, led by my own kind of passion, not by actually where the sources were leading me and the point and the argument, for example. This is the problem, and the personal can come too much when you don't realize there's a personal there. You kind of force it into your work. And I think chapter 4 is another example of that, comparing raids, controversy of dreads in the heroics of the US Air Force. When I was doing my research, I was certainly angered more and more by seeing how the American Air Force was treated after the Second World War and how bomber command was treated after the Second World War. The American Air Force, firebombed Tokyo, dropped two atomic bombs on Japan, yet their Air Force was seen as heroes. But the British Bomber Command was seen almost as villains after the Second World War, and especially as a report made off 45 where the Americans condemn the strategic bombing campaign, yet they did it massively in Japan, and it was almost the hypocrisy really got to me. And so I did this chapter, which could make a lot of sense if you're looking at perceptions, but when you look at the language I use in the chapter, it becomes very problematic. Again, my own personal connection to the topic, I didn't step away far enough, and my personal connection topic really comes through, and the anger I have comes through, and anger that came from my grandfather, that came through my dad, and came through me, because of what we've seen, because of what the stories that we know. And then the conclusion chapter moved towards reconciliation. It was a good chapter, and it was what I was seeing, but was also quite a sad moment as well, because my grandfather died really before he could start seeing the reaps of reconciliation that was going on in terms of memory. So that chapter was more a bit of a sad moment for me. And I think there's a lot of dangers in not recognising his personal bias. Now, this slide, I know Lewis will hate because I've put text on here. He doesn't like text, but I'll put it in anyway. The thing is, the big issue I had was that I didn't recognise my personal story in this. I didn't recognise it. I was just going through the motions. I was going through, I wanted to do it and I was going to do it. I didn't really recognise my personal story in it. So it led to a very strong bias in it. And now every historian is biased. And I think if any historian says I'm not biased, then they've clearly lost their rocker slightly. Every historian's biased, but it really comes out in force. And I think what happens, especially with this work that I produced, is that my personal history and influences it impacted my judgment as a historian. Rather than letting the sources do the talking, rather than let the sources lead me the right way that I should have been going, and kind of being analytical and bringing out the reasons why Bomber Command's perceptions changed throughout decades, it came almost a sense of just trying to vindicate it to an argument that bomber crews shouldn't have been attacked, they shouldn't have been condemned, and the like. And that's not a good way of doing history, is it? Now, my research itself wasn't the problem. My research was good, but I didn't recognise this personal story that was going on within me here, and it leads to problems. And I think you can see that just in some text. There's many other examples in my work. I haven't got them all, but I'll just use a few examples here in this slide. So, where do we start with this? I think let's start with the middle one, which led to Churchill abandoning the men. Yeah, so this is referring to really Churchill's actions towards VE Day and after VE Day as well. And notice the word here, abandoning, here. A very strong language to use, and probably not right either language to use. There's various ways of phrasing it, but you can clearly tell here that I certainly felt a vendetta and anger towards Churchill by how he dealt with Bomber Command after the Second World War. And the word abandoning, when he comes out here, would I do this now? 100% not. But then, this was emotional. This was very personal when it comes out in that text there. I think you can even see in the bit at the bottom, and speeches made by Churchill and George Bell were treacherous to the service, men who'd given their lives for them. Now, George Bell was certainly an interesting character, and George Bell was a character I actually came to admire more over my research. I realised what he was doing and what he was saying. But my grandfather really hated George Bell. He did not like him. He felt George Bell had betrayed the men of Bomber Command. And I think there's probably other crewmen who probably felt similar. I like that because his speeches were, trying to be against the mass bombing raids, and he had good reason to do so. George Bell actually has a good reason to do so, but my grandfather didn't see that. And my grandfather loved Churchill, for example. Man, that generation loved Churchill. He would never go against Churchill, but George Bell was kind of his kind of target, for example, in that way. For me, even though the sources led to actually the fact to see what George Bell was actually doing, I was blinded by my own personal vendetta in this work. And the word treacherous is not a good word for a historian to use at all here, really, especially when I'm looking at what the context I'm looking at here. And notice here, in men who give their lives for them, it gets very personal. It becomes very, very personal. And this is a big bit of a problem in regards to that. Do I think Churchill still made a mistake with that? Yeah, I 100% do think Churchill made a mistake in regards to how he dealt with bomber commands. But I could have worded it better and I could have phrased it better. But I kind of got led this way. And then we got other aspects. The question must be asked, have his men finally found the recognition they deserve? I'm clearly not going here, am I, without a sense of bias or a sense of clear judgment on the topic here. And a clear way of looking at it. Not the best way of arguing the case, not the best way of looking at this kind of perception over time here. You can clearly tell, again, my personal experiences are coming out in that phrase. And I said about the question on the chapter on Dresden and the American Air Force to include Dresden's focus on just and unfair, which again is problematic, really. Dresden is focused upon because of other reasons. Yeah, it's focused upon because of the Soviet use of propaganda. Dresden's focused upon because it's one of the last major raids. It's focused upon because of how it's reported as well. And it has a legacy, as everything from World War II has a legacy. Like Dunkirk has a legacy. Dresden is another thing that encapsulates the entirety of Bomber Command in memory, for example. But I didn't really see that at the time. I didn't really let the source to the talking. I was just angry at the fact that the American Air Force was seen as good guys and the British Air Force was seen as bad guys. Not good, is it? And then I think the key part here. Nonetheless, the question can and should be asked, is it too late? Most of the crewmen who served are no longer with us, and most do not get to see the memorial built. Who am I talking about? Who am I talking about in that sentence? Am I really talking about all the crewmen? I don't think so. I think I'm more talking about my grandfather in that. They never got to saw the memorial built. He never got to saw the change in recognition that took place in the latter part of this, of last decade or so. Now, there was change in the 90s and into the 2000s. There was change there. But to see the memorial and to see the the Bomber Command Center, for example, never saw that. And that question comes from a very personal space. And the big problem I had was that I didn't see it. I didn't see this personal thing. Now, am I going against here personal history in our research? No, 100% not. I'm glad I did what I did. I'm glad I researched what I did. But the problem is, the big problem is I didn't recognize it. I didn't see it. I didn't take that step back from it and let the sources do the talking. I just got so immersed in it, which was the problem that I found with my research. If I take a step back, I really think that it would have produced a much better, cleaner piece of work that argued the proper aspect of Bomber Command perception being changed properly throughout the decades and centuries. And I'm not, ashamed of saying that it still influences me today. My research then still influences me today. My interest that my grandfather gave me in how things change, how memories change, how history changes, stayed with me to the day. It stayed with me my MA, where I did memory of the Civil War and Anglo-Dutch War in Medway, how it changed over time, to what I'm doing now in Colchester. Perceived, reconciled history. No one knows that word reconciled. And the key part of my chapter on that, chapter 4, was reconciliation, wasn't it? The themes have stayed with me. They've shaped me as an historian. I'm not ashamed of that. 100%. Would I rewrite that dissertation? Yes, I would do. I wouldn't do it the same way as I did then. But it was a whole part of me growing as a historian, learning and developing. A lot of historians would go back and go, oh, I really hated my piece of work from 5 years ago, whatever it was. I'm not angry about my piece of work. It's an example of where I am now and how I've shaped and developed as a historian. And it's good. It really is helpful. And I'm thankful that I got the chance to research the topic and to talk about it. And I will go back to researching Bomber Command. There's no doubt about it, okay? I know that my research here on Civil War ends very soon. I will go back to research Bomber Command. I'll go back to research my grandfather in more detail and look at the squadrons properly, look at his role in World War II and in Palestine. 100% I will do that. And I'll go back with a fresh approach, a new approach. My research wasn't an issue in the work. My research was really great, and I don't want to blow my own trumpet here, but it really was. The writing was the problem part. And I will go back to researching it. I want to go back and telling the story, and I want to go back and really analyze this time period. Now, if I ever get a chance to, I don't know. That's the big question. Will I ever get a chance to do this? Sadly, my time in academia is coming to its end, but I will hopefully still have an interest in this and still try to keep it up if I can. Who knows? Who knows? If anyone wants to employ me, by the way, to research it, I'm more than happy to take any job offers. But that's the end of the talk anyway. If you have any questions, please do ask them. I'm happy to answer anything related to my grandfather or to myself. And we'll take it from there. I know Pat's got some questions already, so I will go ahead and answer them. So Pat asked, who was George Bell exactly? Well, George Bell was the chaplain of Bomber Command, I believe, and James is here, who'll tell me wrong if I'm wrong there, but he was the Bomber Command chaplain. He was Bishop of Chichester. I don't know much. I went to the cathedral, and that's the thing about George Bell in Chichester. It's a huge thing. At the university, they had the George Bell Centre, a huge figure in Chichester. And what he does is, in House Lords, he speaks out against the bombing raids. He speaks out against, not the crewmen. He actually mentions he's not speaking against the crewmen. He's speaking out against the raids themselves, which then led to Churchill kind of backtracking. It's George Bell's speeches that lead to Churchill to begin to reanalyze his kind of approach, really. And my grandfather saw this as a betrayal to him, but actually there's much more going on behind the scenes in that. Pat also asks, surely the personal and political aspect of Storm's life will affect their perspective. 100%. There's also a political aspect of anything in research. Our politics will influence how we see the past. You'll get conservative historians, you'll get like Labour historians as well, who view the past differently. Also, our upbringings, our localities, for example. Me being born in Medway Me being from Medway made me really interested in local history about the Anglo-Dutch War. I wouldn't be interested in the Anglo-Dutch War if it wasn't for where I was brought up in Medway, for example, as well. So it's not just, this was just an example of my grandfather, influencing me. There's other things as well. There's the locations where we grow up, and all the like. So a lot of things influence us. The key thing is, Pat, is do we recognize that in our own work? That is the crucial bit, because we do need to recognize that. Sadly, students don't, and you get what comes like what I did there. If you recognize it, then we can address it and actually make a really good argument, I think. There's always the eye on history, and we shouldn't be ashamed of it. We shouldn't be ashamed of it. We just need to be careful of it. That's what I need me to do. My dad says it should be noted that Bomber Command Memorial was funded by private donations, no government money. Yeah, exactly. The Bomber Command Memorial was not funded by government at all. Actually, I think it's funded by a member of the Bee Gees, I think. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother ball game. The government does certainly step away from Bomber Command completely, and it always has, really. But that's a whole new ball game, really, to go into the Bomber Command Memorial and why it was built, and the government's reaction to it as well. But interestingly, the Queen was there at its unveiling, which I think should be noted as well, because if the state was really against it, they would have stopped the Queen maybe from doing that. Oh, let me some questions here. Is there any chance of reading your thesis, Michael? Very interesting talk, which has given me much to ponder. I think your passion is to be applauded. Although I take your point about tempering emotions when you write about topics. My thesis is in the Winchester library, I think, somewhere. So you could probably get hold of it if you really wanted to. If you asked them nicely, they probably would give it to you. I had to get my thesis on my laptop. It is here with me as well, because I had to use it to get the paragraphs. I do need to probably work on it, and we work on it at some point in the future. But certainly, I mean, I'm not against people reading it. I'm gonna have to think about it. Be a bit nervy of people reading it and just see how terrible the research is. Well, what else we got? A lot of questions here that I need to go through. So can I say more about the Dresden raids and the perspectives? My father was a pilot, and I have pictures of his bomb's damage. Yeah, so the Dresden raids, I mean, James obviously is here as well, and he knows it. It's always quite a big topic to talk about. Certainly, there's different opinions out there. So there's even some German historians who have classed Dresden as a war crime, for example. There's historians who support the bombing of Dresden. There's historians who go against the bombing of Dresden. Now, the reason why Dresden gets a focus is, maybe people might disagree with me here, but is how the Soviets use it after the Second World War. They use it as because it was on the east side. It's used to kind of show the Western kind of bombing raids. Even though the Soviets did similar things elsewhere, they used Dresden as a kind of anti-capitalist, anti-West kind of sentiment as well. That's why it gets a lot of the attention compared to, say, like other raids at Hamburg as well, which is probably worse in that regard. But Dresden gets the focus. There's always every year there was like demonstrations presented at Dresden, for example, and even today. I think it was 2015, 2016, the Archbishop of Canterbury went to Dresden and gave a speech about reconciliation. So it's become this kind of site where all bomber commands seen through, rightly or wrongly. It's seen through this one lens, and it still is today. Though hopefully now it's a message of reconciliation rather than the constant back and forth, which sadly kept going throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s during the Cold War. It was a massive part. But Dresden is much more complex. There's refugees going through it. There's an industrial centre there as well. It's a very complex decision, and historians will ask you different things or answer you in different ways on that. I don't think my grandfather was involved in Dresden, because I think he was more on the air transport command part of bomber command. So Ryan says they move and talk, and he teaches historical perspectives, and he gets students to situate themselves and recognize their personality. And that's good, Ryan. It's good that we do as historians recognize our own personality in our work. There's nothing wrong to do so. It's good that we do recognize that, and we can properly deal with these issues that come up with it. So what else we got? So Pat says, I admire your honesty in recognizing your personal influences. Do audiences make a difference though? I've written for degree, postgrad, public and family leadership, and adapted the material accordingly. Yeah, audiences do make a difference in how you write and how you argue. I think if you're writing publicly, then your voice is going to be much more louder than, say, rewriting in a dissertation, for example, where you need to be very concise and very to the point, I guess. The big problem I find was that was a dissertation, undergrad dissertation for from my history degree, and it didn't do what historians should do in that regards. But audience do make a difference, 100%. I wouldn't say public history works is different than academic history works. And I was writing this trying to be an academic historian, but clearly it didn't go that way in that regards. If I wrote publicly, would I be a bit more open in my language? Probably, yeah. I would probably would be a bit more open. But at the same time, I hope as well I'll give it to people to proofread it, and they'll at least hold me back in sometimes and some cases. Like the words treacherous, for example, aren't good words to use in that regards. That wasn't good. But some things like treacherous abandoning the men, maybe that could have been allowed in if I was more for public readership. James asked, did you find any books in your research you'd recommend? Oh, that's a tough one, James. It's a very tough one to think about. Maybe something I'll think for the round table, because certainly I need to think about that. I haven't really thought about that. I mean, I use a lot of the books that you've used, James, and Max Hastings and all that kind of thing about perception. I looked at how students are writing about it. Yeah, so I was looking at how students are writing about these kind of things. I didn't really delve into memory theory as much as I should have done. Again, this is my early stages of looking at memory. But I looked a lot at comic books. They were very interesting from the early 60s about bomber commands. I looked at films, Appointment in London, great film to watch. We really recommend that one. Gives the crews a really kind of human kind of look into that one. But book-wise, I will have to get back for the round table for that one, James, because it's been a bit too long since I've looked at it properly. Yeah, but what I can tell you is that you do see a change from the late 90s onwards in how bomber command is written about. Big change. Louis says, don't be too critical of your younger self. I did my history and BA history and archaeological BA in Manchester 91-94, and I would cringe to read it now. Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, I think the thing is, for me, it's not the fact of how it's written. It's the kind of the emotion that comes through. And it's not, I guess not, I'm not trying to be critical of myself. Maybe it's come across that I've been quite critical. I'm just kind of just self-analyzing and self-reflecting on my previous work and seeing how it's affected me now and how I am now. I'm quite proud of my research, especially on Bomber Command. I think it was fantastic. I mean, huge credit to my dad, by the way, who drove me around Lincolnshire looking at airfields, never ending looking at airfields. So a shout out to my mum and dad for putting up with my rants and tangents as well. They really helped me through it. I think what the big issue is really for me is just the fact that as an historian, you kind of get led a certain way, and I should have been a bit more critical and take that step back. Take that step back. I think that would have really helped my research. Have we got anything else? yeah, if people do want to read my dissertation, I might have to just see if I can get it published somewhere, to see if a journal takes it. Please take my really bad article. I'll have to just do something with it. I will do, because it's something that I do want to address, because there certainly has been ups and downs in Bomb Command's perception throughout the decades, and it'd be good to publish, really. I want to look at my grandfather a bit more before I do that. I want to kind of look into his life, because he saw some stories and he saw some things that are just incredible. So I'll like to do that first, really. My grandfather was a fantastic man. Really, I miss him a lot still. So, my my dad said that he feels that his bias is rubbed off on me. Feels a bit bad about that. And that's it. That's a emotional topic for him even today. And that's an important point that my dad raises, is that the father and son relationship is very important in this. And I think a lot of people, or at least children from those who experience it, always feel it very strongly. And there's nothing wrong about that. I think it's, these things do. But for me, and to my dad as well, don't feel bad about it either, because I got it as well from talking to my grandfather and seeing his life, and even my research brought out even more. I'm not, again, it's to people here, I'm not annoyed or angry about my feelings. It's just how I presented it. But that's a journey historians make. We make a journey. We progress, we adapt, we change, we learn, we grow. That's part of being a historian. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Certainly wouldn't have it any other way. Pat says, can you recommend Countdown to Surrender, Last 100 Days, currently on PBS America, which is excellent. Well, there we go. Countdown to Surrender, Last 100 Days, to everyone who is still here. Certainly a PBS America. Certainly will give that a watch at some point. We've got anything else here? I think that's all the questions people have. If you do have any other questions, please do just ask them. If you ask a question about my grandfather, please do. He certainly was an interesting fellow, and a very brave fellow as that as well. I will say he nearly died buying a pair of shoes for my grandmother. That's also a very true story. And Jason says Dresden by Sinclair McKay is a good book as well. So there we go. There's some good books if you ever want to read them. What we'll do is that we'll start to bring this to a close then, because it looks like the questions seem to have dried up slightly. So that is all fair and good. Thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. I hope that it's been interesting for you. I hope that you've learned something from it today. I hope that you've found it enjoyable, interesting. Again, I want to make this point as well, is that throughout this talk, I'm not attacking personal history. Personal things shape us, and that is a good thing. It's just about us recognizing it. That's all it is, about us recognizing it. As I say, there will be no talks in a month or so. So you can have to try and find fun in other ways, try and find fun without any history indoors for a month. But thank you for being here. We hope that you've enjoyed it, and we will hopefully see you very soon in the future. But have a great summer. Enjoy yourself. Keep safe. And it's been great again to share this talk and this experience with you. It was a bit nerve-wracking. I'm thankful that I could do it. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the day.